Welcome to Back Issues, where I examine horror movie coverage from vintage horror magazines. This is part 2 in a 3-part series detailing the Fangoria magazine coverage of House of a Thousand Corpses. And yes, I'm well aware of the fact that it's been a year and a half since I posted part 1. To be honest, the lack of views on the video made me kind of lose interest in continuing this little series. But I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and it's really not fair to the people that did watch the video and enjoy it. So damn it, I'm gonna finish this thing. And I'm gonna continue the Back Issue series, because I have a lot of fun doing these videos. Anyway, on to part 2. In the previous video, I discussed the January 2001 issue of Fangoria magazine, where Rob Zombie's film first appeared. Up next is the January 2003 issue, Fangoria number 219. The gory cover shows a victim getting his brains eaten by zombies. Interestingly enough, this scene never appears in the final film, but more on that in the next video. The magazine proclaims, finally, hardcore horror. We've also got Darkness Falls, Taken, Hellborn, Black Serenade, and Final Destination 2. The back of the magazine has an ad for the Xbox game House of the Dead Part 3. Looks pretty awesome. Inside, we've got some movie ads, including the film One Hell of a Christmas, which I've never even heard of, but it does look interesting. And take note of the bottom of the page where it says it's available on VHS and DVD. In January of 2003, VHS was still a thing, although for not much longer. There's also an ad for the DVD release of Bruno Mattei's The Other Hell. All of these long-gone stores are listed at the bottom, including Suncoast, which used to be my main place to get movies back in the day. Ominously enough, Amazon.com is listed just above it. Now, Amazon, of course, is one of the main reasons all of these stores would eventually go under. The Fear Film Forecast, an incomplete list of upcoming horror films, paints a picture of what the horror landscape looked like in the early part of 2003. It brings back a lot of memories for me, and I honestly saw many of these in the theater. 14 of those listed, to be exact. Oh, and the biggest horror movie of 2003, Freddy vs. Jason, had no set release date at this time, apparently. The House of a Thousand Corpses coverage here details just why the Rob Zombie epic was delayed for so long. The wide-ranging interview with Zombie begins with him discussing finishing up the sound mixing on the film and watching it on a big screen for the first time. He says, quote, "I got to see it on a big screen, not on video, but on film, with full sound in a theater, and at the end of it, I was like, this film is effing awesome," end quote. Now this enthusiasm is especially interesting now, when taking into account Zombie's current thoughts on the film. In 2014, Zombie called the movie a, quote, calamitous mess, and that all he sees when watching it is, quote, flaw upon flaw upon flaw. It is kind of interesting on how Zombie's opinion of his directorial debut changed over the years. Throughout the Fangoria coverage, Zombie details the problems his film had with Universal Studios, the company that initially financed the $7 million movie. After a first screening in 2001, executives were turned off by the tone and violence. Zombie blames the political climate in the United States at the time, saying, quote, "All this was happening at the worst possible time, because it wasn't too long after the 2000 presidential race, and Joe Lieberman had been so far up Hollywood's ass, and it was right after the Columbine high school shootings, and everyone was talking about violence being marketed to children," end quote. Zombie was definitely right on here, as I clearly remember that period of time being very hard on horror films. He goes on to talk about another studio, MGM, eventually picking up the film for release. The studio paid for Zombie to finish editing the movie, but after Zombie made a joke about MGM having no morals, they dropped it like a hot potato. Now eventually a third studio, Lionsgate, picked up the seemingly cursed film for release. Zombie praises Lionsgate throughout and is even happy with their limited release plans, saying it's, quote, not a movie that needs to be put on 3,000 screens like Men in Black 2, end quote. And I have to say, Zombie was actually right again, as a limited release forced me to drive an hour and a half to find the nearest theater playing the movie. It actually made it seem more special, in a weird kind of way. He goes on to mention that the movie needed some very minor cuts to get an R rating, and Fangoria reveals that Lionsgate wanted Zombie to do an unrated cut for the eventual DVD release. This sadly never happened, but it is good to know that a lot of the violence wasn't trimmed, at least. Zombie concludes the interview by reminiscing about 70s horror films, and says, quote, "I really wanted to capture that strange, sleazy 70s feeling that horror was this other thing, not a mass-produced, cookie-cutter type film, but weird movies made by weird people for other weird people. I believe House of a Thousand Corpses really captures that feeling," end quote. House of a Thousand Corpses would be delayed yet again, but only by a month. Instead of coming out in March 2003, as reported here, it would actually be released in April of 2003, just in time for the next issue of Fangoria magazine that the film would be featured in. To be concluded.